So I've just found this gallery. I must have missed it on my initial walk round. The Gallery of the Grand Men, I'm guessing. So this is quite interesting. So here we've got, that's better. Charles de Gaulle. So this is like famous people and the vehicles we associate with them. Charles de Gaulle, French leader in exile during the Second World War. Doing some reading about Normandy at the moment. I think everybody's agreed that Charles de Gaulle was a bit of a dick. Obviously a talented leader, but a very, very ill-mannered, arrogant man with no sense of diplomacy. And anyway, there's a Renault R39. Same deal as I've spoken to before about French tanks. A gunner, commander and a driver. Very pretty, but pretty useless. A little Jeep here with a guy called Jean de Lattre de Tassigny. I don't know who he is, I'll have to look him up at some point. And speaking of prickly characters, this might have been the most prickly British commander ever. Bernard Law Montgomery. Love him or hate him. I think he's had a bit of a kick-in recently by one-day historians. I think it's fair to say he was also a bit on the spectrum, to say the least. But certainly he got us through some tough times. His thing was building up, concentrating and advancing very, very cautiously. The whole British kind of methodology during the war, the Allied methodology actually, was about using technology rather than the men to win a war. Whereas if you look at the Soviets and to some degree the Germans, they were more about throwing men's lives away. Montgomery was criticised for a lot of his inactivity and his cautious approach. You could say, putting a modern spin on it, that he was just a very cautious man trying not to waste the lives of a small conscript army. So the jury's out on old Bernie. There we go. Speaking of Bernie, we move on to Rommel now. Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. Again, history paints different pictures of people. We're kind of led to believe he was a great man, that he wasn't a rabid Nazi, a very talented tactician, etc. And all of that's probably true. But I can't kind of get around the fact with Rommel that he was, until the end, just before the end, he bought into the regime. He was mates with Hitler. I know he had kind of subversive feelings and meetings towards the end, but don't do it for me. Heinz Guderian, there you go. Heinz Guderian, so he was the architect basically of Blitzkrieg. He was the guy that came up with the whole mixed arms concept of rushing across Europe using these new tactics that I think I mentioned earlier, some of which were developed by the British, and he really grabbed hold of and was given the scope to run with. In the background we got an SD KFZ-11, so this was like the prime mover, usually used for moving troops, artillery, etc., and that's all done up in desert colours. Seems like it's all about prickly characters, doesn't it? So speaking of other prickly characters, here's George Patton, and that's a lovely Jeep he's in. I don't know why I said Dodge, I think. Not particularly up on the lighter vehicles. I said Dodge. Yeah, so Patton, George Patton, cavalryman extraordinaire. Again, great motivator, great leader of troops, but quite a horrible person by the look of it. There's lots of famous instances about him. Another egotist. I suppose you have to be a bit special to take on being a general in a time of war. Killed in a car accident right at the end of the war. There's always been a bit of a suspicion about that. Patton was very vocal about the Russians and how the Russians were going to be the next big enemy, and wanted to kind of get straight into the Russians as soon as he could. Always been mysterious, his death, whether it was truly an accident or whether they somebody bumped him off to shut him up and prevent a war with the Soviets that we couldn't win. Right, here we go. Wars with the Soviets. So this is Zhukov. Again, my Russian history's not particularly good, but what Zhukov is standing in front of is lovely. That's a T-34-76. That's T-34 with a 76mm gun on it. T-34 was just a masterpiece. This thing was mass-produced. The technology is really ropey, but they could knock out thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these, whereas the Germans, every tank they lost was a loss. These things they could just crank out in the factories. A couple of really small things to notice about the T-34 is whereas every other tank has got the track pins sealed on. These aren't, they're just loose. And what happens is there's a bit at the back that every time the tracks rotate, this bit of metal sticking out just bangs them back into place. So it makes a hell of a racket, but it was really cheap. The turret was turned manually, so that was all hand cranked when it went around. Yeah, really rough and ready. And if you look at the slope at the front, if Dukov will get out of the way, this is what inspired the Germans when they designed the Tiger. So you've got this sloped armour to deflect shot. That's pretty poor in the mantlet because you don't want any shot going up and getting caught under your mantlet. But this was basically the thing that the Germans tried to reproduce when they made the sorry, I said Tiger, I meant Panther. When they tried to make when they produced the Panther tank. But again, they just massively over-engineered it when they should have just been knocking these out 10 to the dozen. This is a Panhard armoured car. I think that's meant to be de Gaulle's body on it when he died. Yeah, I think that's like a little coffin thing for de Gaulle. And then these are some other French people I don't know of. Henry de Vergijol and Jean Touzet Laviguier. Obviously nice chaps if they're being mentioned in the museum. And this is a little American, I don't think that's the M3, I could be wrong, that's a different American armour vehicle, I'm not particularly up on them. And last off, we've got Philippe Leclerc de Horty Clouk, I can't say his name, let's just call him Leclerc, the guy they named their modern main battle tank after. And he's in like a really nice American GMC control car. So there you go, a really quick whistle-stop tour of the Hall of the Great Men, even with de Gaulle on it. Cheers!